Today's objective is I can explain the founding and development of Jamestown as the first permanent English colony. So last class we talked about Spain, France, and England and their colonies in North America. We looked at several aspects of the colonization, looking at their motivations, their goals for colonization, and also how they made money. So I want you to quickly review for the do now. How did the English colonies make money? Pause, and we'll take a minute to think. So the English colonies made money by trade as well as farming. The different things they traded were different cash crops as well as timber, also fish. And there's other things that we will definitely dive into in more detail in a little bit. So investing in the colonies. King James I of England thought the best way to establish colonies was to let wealthy people and merchants invest in it. The reason he thought this would be the best way to do so was because it would save him a lot of money. Instead of having England pay the cost of settling this new land or colonizing this new land, he could have investors raise money to do so. And after the investors raised enough money, then they can go apply for a charter, which would be permission to establish a colony. After these investors would apply for this charter, if it was granted, the investors would have to pay fees as well as taxes to England on whatever money they made. So this was a great idea for England because England had very little risk in it. All they had to do was approve a charter, and they had the potential to make a lot of money. So here comes the Virginia Company. The Virginia Company of London was the first to invest in the colonies. First, the way they needed to raise money was they asked people to purchase stock in the company. A stock is a piece of ownership in it. You could still the stock market is a thing in this country right now. But if you purchase a stock in a company like Amazon, you technically have a small piece of ownership in that company. So they asked people to purchase stock into the Virginia Company, and this would help the Virginia Company raise enough money to eventually start their colony. Investors, their goal was to find as much gold and other natural resources so they could trade with England and make obviously a lot of money. And in 1606, King James eventually issued the charter to the Virginia Company, which allowed it to establish a colony in North America. So the first permanent English colony. The Virginia Company chose 7 settlers to govern the colony, which would be a council or a small group. But when they did so, they made sure they sealed their name in a box so everyone on the ship didn't know. One can speculate that they were possibly nervous of maybe a mutiny or an overthrow of those 7 people. So in order to prevent that, they kept it as pretty much a secret until they arrived in the New World. So they arrived in 1607 through Chesapeake Bay, and they sailed further inland off the Atlantic Ocean, and eventually settled in a marshy inland location that they eventually named Jamestown, named for King James I. Fast forward to 1619. By 1619, the governor of Virginia would call for an election of 22 burgesses. That's just a fancy way of saying representatives. The burgesses would meet with the governor from 1619 all the way to 1643, kind of having their input pretty much being the representation for the people in the colony and kind of address any concerns those people might have. By 1643, the burgesses kind of started to meet separately from the governor. This created a Virginia House of Burgesses. The reason that this is so significant is it creates the first democratically elected legislative body in the English colonies. Democratically elected just means the people of the colony were able to elect or select who is to represent them. A legislative body is a body of government that is in charge of making laws. So this actually lays the groundwork for the future governments of the United States. Even though they were able to settle this colony in 1607, this colony of Jamestown, they did face a lot of struggles. Some of the struggles that they faced were a lot of the colonists did lack skilled laborers. There was about 120 men on the ship in the first ship that went to Jamestown. Majority of them were English gentlemen who had never worked a day of their life, never did any hard physical labor. None of them were farmers. These men were wealthy businessmen, and they were here to hopefully find gold and go back home to England and go on their merry way. However, there was it took a lot more work than just being rich. You need to work with your hands, be able to build a fort, be able to go hunt, be able to farm. These men were not able to do so. There was literally only 8 men on that ship who were able or capable enough to build a fort and shelter. And 8 men who are able to do that for 120 is quite a problem. Also, producing food was a problem. The land in which they settled on was marshy land, almost swampy. It wasn't ideal for farming food. And very few of the colonists actually even knew how to plant crops. There wasn't many farmers on the ship. So they still had some supplies on the ship, but they quickly ran out of those, and many of the colonists became very hungry. Also, fresh water was in very short supply. The colonists unfortunately landed in Jamestown during a drought, meaning there was not enough water to survive. The water in the rivers had depleted, and ocean water actually started to seep into their freshwater resources. And you can't drink ocean water because it's salt water, and that will actually make you incredibly sick. So drinking brackish water is um, another way of saying salty water. Disease was rampant. Often, colonists often threw their waste into rivers. We're fortunate enough to live in a time where we have indoor plumbing. They did not in 1607, so a lot of their bodily waste they would happen to throw in the rivers, hoping that the rivers would flush out the waste. However, their waste would happen to just fester and just sit there. So sometimes they would bathe in their own waste. Sometimes drink their own waste, maybe or drink water without realizing their waste was still in it. These unhealthy living conditions cause diseases like dysentery and typhoid, which are very deadly diseases. Those were not the only problems. When they first arrived in Jamestown, um, the people that lived in Jamestown were the Powhatan Indians. The Powhatan Indians at first were a little bit welcoming. They were willing to trade with the English. The English would trade metal tools, copper and beads. In exchange, Powhatans would give the colonists food and furs. So this actually kind of bought the colonists, since they weren't able to farm their own land, they were actually at least able to trade some of the supplies they had with the natives. As more and more settlers arrived, the colony started to grow and expand. And then with the colony expanding, it actually started taking up more of the Powhatan territory. This started to frustrate the Powhatans, and then eventually the drought severely reduced the food supply, which led to some of the colonists actually stealing food from the Powhatans. This put a really big strain on their relationship. So much so that the Powhatans said, you know what, we're going to block their entrance at the fort and then let them out. So therefore, the colonists were trapped in their fort at Jamestown, where they were not allowed to go out and get food supplies. And eventually, their food supplies started to run out. So starvation and disease started to take its toll. Some of the desperate colonists said, you know what, I can't go out and get food. We have a horse here. I'm going to eat this horse. I'm going to eat this rat. I have an extra pair of shoes. That shoe I could boil and maybe eat some of it as a little bit of protein. And some historians haven't even said that some of the colonists even resorted to cannibalism, which is eating other humans, which shows like the serious desperation that many of the colonists had at the time. This time period was known as the Starving Time. It took place during the winter of 1609 to 1610. The reason that this took place was there was obviously food shortages that we've talked about a couple of times. There was some really bad leadership. There was obviously attacks by the Powhatans because they were frustrated with having their food supply stolen. This resulted in the death of two-thirds of the colonists. That's 66%. By the time the spring arrived, most of the colonists were dead. Even though the first group of English colonists in Jamestown severely struggled and almost died off, eventually the settlers at Jamestown found their way. They never found gold or silver themselves, but then eventually the Virginia Company was able to prosper. The Powhatan eventually did teach the settlers certain skills, specifically farming, and they found out that tobacco was a perfect crop to grow in Virginia. The soil and the climate were ideal for growing tobacco. Tobacco was in huge demand in England, so they were able to. If you look in the image, you could see a gentleman picking the tobacco. What they did was they would hang the leaves in the barn, and they would dry out. And that's what the colonists would smoke, or even the British. And they would take the tobacco leaves and ship them off to England for the market to be sold. And this actually helped the Virginia Company make a lot of money. So much so that they said, you know what? Everyone needs to start. If you own land in Virginia, you're going to grow tobacco. And that's what happened. There's a ton of tobacco fields. Pretty much majority of the land in colonial Virginia was just used for growing tobacco. This actually helped Virginia be one of the most prosperous colonies in the New World. The next few slides I'm going to have you do on your own. These are just different documents that highlight the struggles. So you can go through these slides on your own independently, and I'll kind of just quickly skim through them. This one talks about the rainfall, it has a rainfall index. Um, and then here is a list of different occupations that many of the original settlers in Jamestown had. Here's another text document that shows the conflict of the Native Americans and the original Jamestown settlers. And then you have an exit ticket that you can click on here and answer. Once again, please don't make sure you check out your assignments. You have 4 assignments this week that are due. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Let me know. And I will be of assistance to you. I hope you have a great day. Peace out.